Hello, and let's talk about workers' issues during the lockdown and the aftermath of the pandemic. Tomorrow is May 1st, International Workers' Day. In India and across the world, this is the day when workers in various sectors organize and mobilize to honor the struggles of the past and declare their commitment to fight on for a better and just world. This year, though, we are living in strange circumstances. This is a time when workers face an unprecedented challenge, the COVID-19 pandemic, which is affecting their livelihood as well as their ability to mobilize. In countries across the world, we are also seeing governments attack the gains and rights of the working class. In India, the most direct example of this is a bid by the government to increase working hours from 8 to 12. This is a follow-up to the long-term strategy of this government to reduce and diminish workers' rights. A very good example of this is the bid to dilute labour codes. So workers' unions have a very difficult and challenging task to mobilize and fight for their rights during this age of physical distancing. What are the challenges faced by workers and what is the attitude of the government? Which are among the sectors worst affected? We talked to Dr. K. Hemalatha, President of the Centre of Indian Trade Unions, on some of these issues.
Thank you for joining us today. So, can we first talk about healthcare workers who are rightly being called the frontline warriors during this battle? Can you tell us particularly about the role being played by care workers such as ASHA workers, Anganwadi workers, nurses, midwives, etc., and the sort of treatment they're getting both at the hands of the government and the people?
Yeah, the ASHA workers and the Anganwadi workers, they are also, along with the doctors and nurses, they are also part of the frontline workers. And they are asked to go house to house and identify the people and provide them advice and other things. So along with the nurses, they are going to different houses. They are conducting a survey. And the ASHA workers, though the Anganwadi workers are actually not directly under the Ministry of Health, they are working under the Ministry of Women and Child Development. But because they have close contact with the people, they are also part of the team and they are also going house to house. And the main problem is that they are not provided with any protective equipment, either gloves or masks or anything. That is one area where they are exposed to risk. This is not part of their work, but they are doing this because they are closely related to the people, particularly in the villages. But they are not having any additional remuneration. As it is, the ASHAs are not provided with any wages. They are only called social health activists and they are provided with some incentive, which is very low. And they have additional work and they are not paid for that. That is one issue. Second, they don't have any protective gear. That is the second one. And third, in many places, they are being beaten up by the people. In some places, people think that they have come to conduct the CAA survey. And some places they are, because of this stigmatization and all these things, particularly in the minority areas, they don't want to give the information, they don't want people to go there. So this is, though now under this scheme, the government has announced that ASHAs also will be provided this 50 lakh insurance. Actually, it is when they die, their family will get. So, but even that is not there for the Anganwadi workers. So, Anganwadi workers are also part of the team. They are also subject to all these difficulties. They also don't have any additional remuneration for this extra work. It is not part of their routine work. And they are also exposed to the risk. And they are also not provided with any protective equipment nor with this insurance. So, these are the main issues that these health workers face today.
And if we talk about other sectors, there are also workers active in many other sectors who are not being talked about as much. So can you tell us more about them? And they're also working despite all these concerns. They haven't stopped their work and they're the ones sustaining us right now. So can you tell us more about the crucial role being played by the working class during this lockdown?
Yeah. So in addition to the health workers, that is the nurses or the doctors or the ASHA Anganwadi workers, there are various other workers who are also indirectly related, who are working in the particular circumstances, like the transport workers, the goods transport workers, the loading and unloading workers, and also the railway trackman. Recently, we came across a condition, means a complaint, where the railway ministry is trying to fast track. Generally, what they do when the repairs of the tracks, etc., the trackmen, which they do that, they are done when the in between some time, when the rails, when the trains don't pass. But now, because the trains are not running, they want to fast track that, and they are not provided any, means they are not even under the consideration. There is no scope of social distancing. All of them have to together work, and they are not provided with any protective care. So these are, and many places they are finding difficulty to even attend the work, because their villages, they come from nearby villages. In the villages, they have passed resolutions and they are saying that you can't go to work. If you go work, now the government has issued guidelines that when a particular sector is working, then the employer has to provide accommodation to the workers, their food, etc. But these, even the railways is not providing for their own trackmen. So these are, so there are many other sectors where workers are compelled to work, the municipal workers, the sanitation workers. So even the bank employees, are also working, the banks are functioning. And because of the Jan-Dhan accounts, etc., there is a lot of a crowd, particularly in the beginning of the month. But the bank employees are also not provided with any protective gear or anything. So the various other sectors, the employees and the workers, they are also working, but the government is not at all taking care of them. In addition, of course, to the migrant workers, which has come out as a very big problem, the government guidelines, which were issued immediately after the lockdown, they say that the employers should not retrench the workers, including the contract workers and casual workers. Their wages should be paid, and those who are in leave, they also should be treated. Those who have taken leave before and could not join because of the lockdown, they also should be considered as attending the work, and they should be paid wages. But nowhere is this being implemented. Very few places, including the public sector undertakings, like the Border Road Organization. We have been receiving a lot of complaints that they are retrenching workers who have been working for decades. And similarly in the private sector, many workers, they are not being paid, and not only the small and medium enterprises, even in the big IT sector, we have found that women, pregnant women, they are being retrenched. Many employees have been retrenched. We have been receiving complaints for a lot of companies based in Pune, based in Calcutta, based in Chennai, Gurgaon, etc. IT companies, including multinationals, they have retrenched their employees, and they are also not paying wages. So this is organized, unorganized public sector, and we have been demanding. It is very difficult for the small and medium enterprises to pay wages because they are so small and they can't pay full wages. So we have been demanding that the government should help them, the small enterprises. In many advanced countries also, the governments are paying the wages. So the government should at least pay the wages for the workers in these enterprises. So in general, the package that the government has given, which is less than 1%, 0.8%. And even out of that, there are certain accounts like the Manrega workers' wages, which have been already accounted for in the budget. So if we remove those things, it comes to hardly 84 or 94 thousand crores. So this is very meager. So we have been demanding that particularly the government has to take care of the migrant workers. They have to provide them the wages, and in addition, all the non-tax paying, non-income tax paying people in the country, there should be cash transfer of 7,500. so that one food and the other expenditures they can meet. And once the COVID is over, you need the workforce, people who have to work. Unless the people are there to work, they are subject to starvation and malnutrition, which is already very serious in our country. Then how the economy will run?
In our next segment, we bring you a portion of NewsClick's interview with renowned musician and activist Roger Waters. Roger Waters talks about the response of the powers that be to the COVID-19 pandemic, the protests in Chile, and many other issues. You can watch the full interview on NewsClick's YouTube channel.
Why don't we start with where we are? I mean, we're in the middle of this COVID-19 global pandemic. You're in the United States at present. Give us a sense of what you think of the governments of, let's say, Boris Johnson in Great Britain, Donald Trump in the United States, and how they've handled the pandemic and how these societies are coping with it.
Well, that's an interesting question. Bojo is somewhat surprising in that his response is not pure Thatcherism, or it doesn't seem to be. So it may be that you have to understand, when I answer these questions, though, I never watch television and I don't read the papers. So somehow, information only trickles down through me through a wall of resistance on my part, not to buy the propaganda, not to listen to it, not to take any notice of it. But obviously, some of it gets through. In fact, this morning I got up and I had my first cup of coffee, and the first thing that I did was read Corona Shock, your piece about China, which I'd read before, because now you have that story going out as a booklet with those beautiful paintings illustrating it all. But it's all it's such an important article because people have to be told that that COVID-19 is not some Chinese plot to destroy the Western civilization, which is the story that Mike Pence and and Pompeo and the Donald himself clearly, and probably Boris Johnson as well, would have us believe, because that's the way their minds work, and it's all part of that exercise of control. I was in New York when this all started happening. I've sort of done a runner, so I'm now 100 miles almost from New York, in the countryside somewhere in isolation. So, like everybody else, I'm sort of waiting to see what's going to happen, and whether all the panicking about, the world economy is going to collapse and it'll be, billions of people are going to die of starvation because we isolated, or whatever the current fad story may be. Thank goodness we have electron microscopes, and we have competent medical authorities who are doing the research and who are trying to figure out what to do. I had an interesting email exchange with a friend of mine the other day. He's called his name's Greg Galeazzi, and he's a lovely young man. He had both his legs blown off in Afghanistan a few years ago. And what did he do when he got back? And I met him in Walter Reed, where I was working with some of them making music. And what did he decide to do, Greg? He decided that he was going to apply to medical school. He's now in his he's just starting his fourth year at Harvard Medical School. Can you imagine? I mean, the courage that it's taken to do that. So it was fascinating. And he said that because they're now in isolation techniques and things, they're having to do bits of the curriculum that they're fitting in from other places. Ethics. And I went, wow, we need to talk about this a bit. And I haven't had that conversation with him, but in order to have a health service that is basically profit motivated is a contradiction in terms. It's oxymoronic. No, if you have a health service, it has to be about providing health care for the people. And of course, in the United States, they don't have one. They have to have a health service for rich people, and that's it. And so it's a strange and alien atmosphere for an Englishman who grew up with the National Health Service, in England. And so I literally started my life, with Beecham and in that post-war dream where the health service was created in post-war England. And of course, it's all crumbled to some large extent. I don't know if you've seen John Pilger's documentary. I think it's called The Dirty War Against the National Health Service. So, we see the same story is unfolding all over the world in different ways. And if you don't watch television, if you live in the United States and you don't read the New York Times or the Washington Post or any other of those instruments of propaganda, you do get a picture that filters down. So, and it's really interesting the way the more socialized societies are resisting the empire and are kicking back. So you see it in, obviously in South America, in Venezuela and Bolivia and Mexico now. And you see this struggle going on between the purest evil of Bolsonaro and, whatever his name is, Marquez in Colombia and all of that. And, the Bolivarian revolution. It doesn't matter whether it's Bolivar or Che Guevara or whoever it is, but for the last couple of 100 years, people have been trying to figure out how to wrest power from the monarchs and allow it to devolve to the people.
Roger, last year there were massive demonstrations in Chile, in Ecuador. Ecuador, of course, which you know very well. You've been to the areas where Chevron had its big oil spill. There were massive protests in
It's
Bolivia.
not a spill. Don't call it a spill. It's not a spill. It was the deliberate.
Exactly. It's not a spill. You're quite right. The oil, let's say the release of oil into people's communities and so on. Those protests were quite significant, but obviously they were shut down, because of this great lockdown. On March 31st, you released your cover of Victor Jara's really brilliant song, El Derecho de Vivir en Paz. Why did you release that song on March 31st in the middle of the lockdown with beautiful images of the protests from Chile?
Why? Because I have a strong affinity with Santiago in particular, because that's where I've worked when I've been in Chile. But also, I got involved with when they had the big earthquake and the tsunami, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, whenever it was, a little bit, with an organization called Un Techo para Chile, a roof over Chile. And I make friends, where I go, and I stay in touch with people. So that video was put together by a friend of mine, Pablo Lopez, his name. He's a doctor. He's a working doctor, so he's pretty busy at the moment in Santiago, working in ICU. And he put together the video. So he made the video that goes with my rendition. However, I had made it my business to go and have a glass of wine with Joan, who is Victor Jara's widow. And so I met her, and I met Amanda, their daughter, and a few years ago when I was doing gigs there, and actually we played El Derecho. I had it on my phone, and in the National Stadium, I held it up to a microphone, and everybody started singing along with it, because it was him, singing the song, and of course he is a great national hero. So that kind of indomitable spirit and resistance to the Pinochets, and now Piñera, who's the current well, he's El Presidente, but he's, you know, he's cut from very much the same cloth as Pinochet, is heroic, and well, obviously we'll never forget them. And in Santiago and in a lot of other places in South America as well, the cacerolazo, which is the protest with the banging of pots and pans in the street, or even just after curfew, leaning out of the window and banging, is deeply moving. And they are. I mean, I wrote some new lyrics, and that's the other thing, is it stems from anger as well. They are shooting children's eyes. They're trying specifically to blind them. They shoot them with balls, plastic balls from shotguns, so like that size, and they aim at their eyes, and they're quite good shots, and they've blinded thousands of kids, and it's disgusting. It's so disgusting.
That's all we have in this episode of Let's Talk. We'll be back tomorrow with the news developments of the day. Until then, keep watching NewsClick.